I stood there in court trying not to cry as my ex-husband's lawyer tore me apart in front of the judge. "She's broke. She can't even afford a home or decent food and clothes for the kids," she said with a smirk. "Why should she get them?" I clenched my jaw and stayed quiet. I could feel my hands shaking. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing me fall apart. The judge nodded slowly, as if he agreed. That moment felt like the air was being sucked out of my chest. All I could think about were my children, Luca and Aria. What would happen if they were taken from me and handed over to a man who only cared about control and appearances? I couldn't afford a lawyer like his. I couldn't afford anything, really. I was barely holding on. But I was here. I showed up. And I was doing everything I could for my kids. Then, just as I felt myself slipping into that quiet panic where your body is still but your thoughts are screaming, my 7-year-old son stood up. "Mom," he said loud enough for the courtroom to hear, "can I show the judge the letter I found in Dad's safe?" The room froze. Everyone turned. Derek stiffened. His lawyer blinked like she'd just been slapped. Even the judge stopped mid-sentence. I didn't know what letter Luca meant. My heart pounded. He had never said anything about a letter, but I nodded. And as he walked toward the bench with that folded piece of paper in his small hand, everything changed. I wasn't always the kind of woman who sat in court afraid to speak. I used to be confident. I had a job I loved, friends I laughed with, dreams that felt real. But when I married Derek, things changed slowly, and then all at once. He wasn't always cruel. In the beginning, he was charming, generous, and convincing. He told me I didn't need to work. He said I should stay home, raise the kids, and let him handle the money. "You've done enough," he said once. "You deserve rest." I didn't realize what I was giving up when I agreed. My independence, my voice, my safety net. I became invisible in my own life. After our daughter Aria was born, Derek started changing. He was always tired, always critical. Every dollar I spent was questioned. If I bought diapers without checking the sale price first, I got silence for hours. If I mentioned going back to work part-time, he'd remind me I didn't have a recent resume or say, "We don't need your help. We need you to be a good mom." By the time he left, I had nothing. No savings, no lawyer. No one in my corner except my kids. He cut off the joint account and moved in with someone new. He hired a lawyer right away. I couldn't even afford one. I went to the free legal clinic at the county courthouse and stood in line for 2 hours, holding a folder full of receipts and photos of my kids eating boxed macaroni on paper towels because we didn't have clean dishes. Our apartment was small. I worked 2 cleaning jobs under the table just to stay ahead of the rent. We didn't have cable or internet. I used a prepaid phone and hoped it wouldn't run out of minutes if the school needed to call me. I washed my kids' clothes by hand in the bathtub sometimes. The water heater barely worked, so I'd boil water on the stove and mix it in buckets. Luca never complained. Aria would hum little songs while I scrubbed her socks. I didn't tell anyone how bad it got, not even my mother. I was too ashamed. She'd warned me about Derek years ago, said he looked at people like they were transactions. But I was too in love back then to listen. When the court date came, I was terrified. Derek had filed for full custody, claimed I was unfit. He said I was unstable, poor, unable to provide a good life. His lawyer was brutal. They brought spreadsheets and photos of his beautiful home. They wore expensive suits and smiled like everything was already decided. I walked into the courtroom with a borrowed dress, a hand-me-down blazer, and a plastic folder with school records, attendance sheets, and a letter from our landlord confirming I'd never missed a payment. I knew it wasn't enough, but I had to try. For Luca. For Aria. That morning, Luca held my hand as we walked up the courthouse steps. "Is it going to be okay?" he asked. I smiled, but it felt thin. "Yes, baby, it's going to be okay." But I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure of anything. All I knew was that I loved my kids. I knew what it was like to go without and still put them first. I knew what it felt like to cry quietly in the bathroom after bedtime so they wouldn't see. I knew how hard I worked to make their little world feel safe when everything around us was shaking. Inside the courtroom, I sat straight and still. I watched Derek avoid eye contact. I listened as his lawyer listed off everything I didn't have: money, stable housing, reliable transportation. She said, Her son wears secondhand shoes with holes. Her daughter's teacher says she sometimes skips breakfast. This isn't neglect. This is poverty. And poverty isn't a crime, but it is a risk. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask, where were you when I was skipping dinner to make sure there was enough cereal left? Where were you when I was selling my wedding ring to buy coats for the winter? But I stayed silent. I had learned that in court, anger doesn't look like strength. It looks like instability. The judge nodded slowly as if every accusation made perfect sense. My heart sank, and just when I felt like I might not make it through the rest of the hearing, I felt that little tug on my sleeve. Luca, my sweet, brave boy. He looked up at me with wide eyes and whispered, "Mom, can I say something to the judge?" The courtroom felt colder the second Derek's lawyer began to speak. Carla Dean walked with the confidence of someone who had done this 100 times and expected to win again. She stood tall, her voice loud and clipped, as she laid out her version of my life, one stripped of truth, one meant to humiliate. She has no stable employment. She receives inconsistent financial assistance. Her apartment is temporary housing. The children deserve better than a mother who can barely feed them. I didn't look at Derek. I didn't need to. I could already picture his face. Blank, relaxed, watching this unfold like he had nothing to do with it. As if my financial ruin wasn't carefully orchestrated by him. He was the one who drained our joint account days before leaving. He was the one who refused to help with bills unless it made him look good in front of his parents. But none of that mattered in that room. The only thing the judge had in front of him were the spreadsheets and photos from Derek's side, pictures of his pristine house, the fully stocked fridge, the private school brochures. Carla flipped through her documents with a quiet rhythm, pulling out my bank statements. She held them up like they were dirty laundry. Your Honor, as you can see, my client provides a secure, consistent environment. The children have their own rooms, regular meals, a nanny. Meanwhile, Ms. Moreau has no documented income, no verified employer. She's behind on utilities and was issued a warning for late rent in February. This is not a safe or stable situation for two young children. I felt my face flush. She didn't mention the fact that I had picked up every job I could, often cleaning houses for cash because formal work wasn't an option with 2 kids and no childcare. She didn't mention that the rent notice was resolved within days, or that I'd sold everything valuable I had to keep food in the fridge. The judge didn't speak right away. He leaned back, looking down at the papers like they confirmed what he already believed, that I was trying. But trying wasn't enough. I wanted to defend myself, to explain everything, but I also knew how that would look. I had been warned not to interrupt, not to sound defensive, not to cry too much or appear too cold. So I sat there, silent, embarrassed, burning with shame and frustration. My fingers dug into the edge of my seat. I kept my eyes on the kids sitting quietly beside me. Arya was drawing on a piece of scratch paper with a dull crayon. Luca was watching Derek with narrowed eyes. Then Carla said the sentence that cut deeper than any insult she had thrown so far. Why should she get the children if she can't even afford to care for them? It echoed in my mind. Why should I get them? I held back the tears that were pressing behind my eyes. I knew my reality wasn't impressive on paper. I didn't have new clothes for them. I couldn't afford fancy lunches or ballet classes. But I was there every night. I was the one who brushed their hair, checked for monsters under their beds, and stayed up late hand-sewing patches into their jackets because I couldn't afford new ones. None of that mattered to the court. Only numbers did. Numbers I didn't have. The judge looked at me, his eyes heavy with doubt. He opened his mouth as if he was about to speak when I felt it, that small tug on my arm again. Luca. He whispered, "Mom, can I show the judge the letter I found in Dad's safe?" At first, I didn't understand. What letter? I stared at him, confused, until he pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket and held it up. My stomach turned. I didn't know what it was, but something in Derek's posture shifted. He sat up straighter. Carla's eyes locked on the paper. "Luca, what is that?" I asked softly. He didn't answer me. He looked at the judge. "Can I give this to you?" he asked. The judge looked surprised but nodded. "Bring it here." Luca stepped forward, small and steady, walked past the row of polished suits and wide eyes, and handed the letter to the judge with both hands. The room fell into a strange, heavy silence. I could see Derek start to sweat. Carla turned to him, whispering something quickly, her confidence faltering for the first time. The judge unfolded the paper. I watched his eyes move across the words. His expression changed slowly. Confusion, then realization, then something sharper. He looked up, directly at Derek. "Mr. Moreau," he said, "would you like to explain this?" The moment the judge spoke those words, the temperature in the courtroom seemed to shift. Derek's eyes widened. He opened his mouth but said nothing. Carla leaned toward him quickly, whispering again, but this time her voice carried a thread of urgency. Whatever was written on that piece of paper, it had shaken something loose. I leaned forward, my heart hammering, trying to read the judge's face. He held the letter in both hands and looked down at it again, his brow furrowed. Then he read it aloud. To Derek Moreau, from L. Becker, CPA. Subject, Strategic Financial Shielding, Divorce Prep. Then he paused, glancing at the courtroom, then back at Derek. "This is a financial strategy letter, dated 3 months before your divorce was filed. It details instructions for opening offshore accounts, transferring assets to shell LLCs, and minimizing reported income in order to influence custody and support proceedings. It includes the line, quote, 'Keep primary custody if possible, but at minimum ensure she has little ground for legal appeal by appearing financially stable and morally sound.'" He stopped reading. The silence in the courtroom wasn't just quiet, it was suffocating. Every eye was now on Derek. Even Carla looked stunned. She turned her head slowly toward him, whispering something that sounded like, "Is this real?" I didn't move. I couldn't. I was frozen between disbelief and a kind of quiet rage that had no outlet. I had suspected things. I knew Derek was strategic, cold when it came to money, and ruthless when it came to getting what he wanted. But to see it in writing, to hear a judge read it out loud in front of my children, was something I never imagined. The judge lowered the letter and placed it neatly on the bench in front of him. Then he looked back at Derek and said, "You were intentionally misleading this court. You've attempted to manipulate the outcome of these proceedings through financial deception. This letter is a direct attempt to use wealth and calculated dishonesty to deny your children access to their mother." Derek stood up abruptly. "That letter is old. It wasn't used. It's not even—" "Sit down, Mr. Moreau," the judge snapped. The authority in his voice startled everyone. Aria looked up from her drawing and reached for my hand. I wrapped my arm around her without looking away from the judge. He turned his attention back to me. "Miss Moreau, were you aware of this letter before today?" "No, Your Honor," I said. "This is the first time I've seen or heard of it." "And your son found it?" I nodded, my throat tightening. "Yes. He never mentioned it until now." Luca looked up at me then. "I thought it might help. I found it when I was looking for my tablet at Dad's house. I didn't want to get anyone in trouble, but I didn't want us to lose." The judge stared at him for a long moment. Then something softened in his expression. "You did the right thing, young man," he said. He turned back to Carla Dean. "I will be reviewing this document in full and pausing this hearing for a formal inquiry into Mr. Moreau's financial conduct. In the meantime, primary custody will remain with Ms. Moreau, with temporary suspension of the defendant's parenting time until this matter is resolved." The words sank in, slowly. I heard them, but my body didn't react at first. It was like my brain needed a moment to make sure I hadn't imagined them. When they finally registered, I felt my knees tremble. I sat down hard, pulling both of my kids into my arms. Carla Dean stood silent, lips pressed together, arms folded tightly. She didn't argue. She couldn't. The damage was done. Derek didn't say another word. After the judge left the bench, the bailiff dismissed the court. I stayed seated, arms wrapped around my children like they were the only thing anchoring me to the ground. Luca leaned into me and whispered, "Did I mess up?" "No, baby," I said. "You saved us." He nodded once and didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. I finally understood what kind of strength it takes for a child to carry something like that. And I realized something else. The fight wasn't over. But for the first time in a long time, it felt like the truth had a real chance. I walked out of the courtroom that day holding my kids' hands, barely feeling the ground beneath my feet. My legs were moving, but my mind was somewhere else. I kept replaying the judge's words in my head, trying to believe them. He had stopped the hearing. He had suspended Derek's parenting time. He had believed me, or at least he had finally seen the truth for himself. Outside, the air was cold. Luca let go of my hand to zip up Arya's coat. I watched him, feeling a rush of gratitude that I didn't have words for yet. How do you thank a child for something like that? Or standing up and doing what no adult in that courtroom had the courage to do? A few days later, the court ordered a formal investigation into Derek's financial activity. I met with a court-appointed investigator, a woman named Ms. Trent, who listened carefully, took notes, and never once looked at me like I was less than. She reviewed the letter, asked questions about our finances during the marriage, and requested permission to pull all relevant tax records and asset disclosures from both sides. I agreed without hesitation. I had nothing to hide. Derek, on the other hand, did. Within a week, his house of cards started to fall. The investigator uncovered multiple accounts registered to shell companies in Nevada and Delaware. She found wire transfers to overseas banks, cash transactions that were never disclosed, and tax inconsistencies that made it clear he had been hiding income for years. Every time I received an update, I felt something slowly rebuilding inside me. Trust in my own memory, confidence in my instincts, and belief that maybe, just maybe, justice could exist. For so long, I had been made to feel like I was imagining things. Derek had convinced everyone, including parts of me, that I was weak, paranoid, and incapable. But now, the facts were proving otherwise. The final hearing came faster than I expected. When I walked into the courtroom again, this time with legal representation provided by a domestic support advocacy group, I stood taller. I wasn't wearing borrowed clothes. I had found part-time work cleaning offices and had saved enough for a modest black dress and sturdy heels. Small things, but they felt like armor. Derek looked different, too. The confidence was gone. His new lawyer spoke in short, tight sentences. There were no smug glances, no fake smiles. The courtroom had shifted. The judge entered and began the session with a statement. This court has reviewed the financial investigation into Mr. Moreau and finds substantial evidence of willful non-disclosure, asset concealment, and manipulation of income to gain an advantage in these proceedings. This behavior directly contradicts the best interests of the children involved. He paused and looked down at me. Ms. Moreau, in light of these findings and your demonstrated commitment to your children's well-being under difficult circumstances, this court grants you full physical and legal custody of Luca and Arya. Mr. Moreau is ordered to pay backdated child support and will be subject to monitored visitation pending further review. I didn't cry right away. I think part of me was still bracing for the moment to be taken away, for someone to say there was a mistake or a change, but no one spoke. The judge signed the order. The gavel fell. It was real. Arya squealed quietly and hugged my waist. Luca squeezed my hand. He didn't smile, but his eyes were shining, steady and sure. That night, we had pancakes for dinner and danced to music on the radio. Nothing fancy, just us in our tiny kitchen, laughing until the sound filled every corner of the apartment. I sat on the floor afterward, holding them both on my lap. Arya was singing. Luca was drawing something on a notepad. When I looked down, I saw what he had written, a picture of a house with 3 stick figures. Above it, he'd written, "Home is where Mom is." That letter he found was more than just a piece of evidence. It was a lifeline, a doorway out of fear and into something that finally felt like peace. He could have hidden it, thrown it away, ignored it. But he didn't. Because even at 7 years old, my son knew right from wrong. And in a courtroom full of adults, he was the one brave enough to tell the truth. It's been 6 months since that day in court, but I still think about it often. Not just the moment the judge ruled in my favor, or the look on Derek's face, but the quiet strength it took to get there. The kind of strength that doesn't come from power or money, but from love. The kind that keeps going when everything else is gone. After the ruling, life didn't become perfect. I still worked long hours. I still budgeted every grocery trip down to the last dollar. I still picked up secondhand clothes and clipped coupons and said no to things other families might take for granted. But the fear was gone. The constant pressure, the feeling that someone was waiting to take everything away, that was over. Derek made a few attempts to regain control. He filed a motion to reduce his support payments, then tried to question the monitored visitation requirements. But the evidence was strong, and the court stood firm. He showed up to his scheduled visitations 3 times, then stopped trying. I didn't explain it to the kids in too much detail. I only told them what they needed to know. Their dad wasn't ready to be consistent, and they deserved people who showed up and stayed. They stopped asking after a while. Luca still talks about the letter sometimes. One evening, we were sitting on the couch, and he asked, "Was I in trouble for taking it?" I shook my head and looked him in the eye. "No, baby, you were brave. You told the truth when it mattered most." He nodded like he understood and leaned his head on my shoulder. That moment reminded me of how easily children carry burdens we don't even see. He had carried that piece of paper for weeks. He had waited for the right time to speak. He had chosen justice when no one asked him to. I started going to counseling. At first, it felt strange to talk about everything out loud, to hear myself admit just how bad it had been. But healing needs air. The more I spoke, the more I realized how much I had internalized. The shame, the guilt, the lie that being poor meant I was failing my children, that I had to prove my worth by looking okay instead of just being honest about how hard it was. My counselor helped me see something I hadn't before. I wasn't weak for struggling. I was strong for surviving, strong for keeping a roof over our heads, for showing up to court without a lawyer, for putting my children first every single day. One weekend, I found a part-time office job that offered benefits. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. I took it. I bought a laptop so I could take evening classes online and work toward a certification in bookkeeping. It was something I had always been good at, but never believed I could turn into a real career. The kids started doing better, too. Aria made a new best friend at her preschool, and her teacher said she'd become more talkative and confident. Luca joined the school's art club and had one of his drawings put up in the hallway. He chose a picture of a tree with roots, thick and deep. Underneath it, he wrote one word: growing. That's what we're doing now, growing. It doesn't always feel fast or easy, but it's steady. Every week we move a little further from fear and a little closer to peace. Sometimes people ask me how I stayed so calm in court, how I didn't fall apart. The truth is, I almost did. But when you're a mother and your babies are on the line, you find a way to keep breathing, to keep standing. Not because it's easy, but because giving up was never an option. This story started in a courtroom, with me being accused of being too poor to be a good mother. It ended with the truth being spoken by the smallest voice in the room, a child who knew what love looked like and wasn't afraid to prove it. We didn't win because we had power or money or perfect appearances. We won because we had honesty, because we stayed kind, and because even when the odds were against us, we refused to break. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: justice doesn't always come easy, but it can still come. And sometimes, when it does, it arrives in the form of a folded letter in a little boy's hand, held with quiet courage, offered with love. That's the day everything changed, not just in court, not just legally, but in my heart. That was the day I stopped surviving and started living again. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the quiet strength it takes to keep going when everything is against you, then please take a moment to like this video. Share it with someone who might need to hear that they're not alone. Leave a comment. Whether you're a parent, a survivor, or someone who just believes in truth and justice, your voice matters here. I read every single one. And if you want more real stories about resilience, love, and what it means to fight for what matters most, subscribe to the channel. We're building a community here, one that sees people, not just their struggles. Thank you for being part of it. I swear the air inside that church was heavier than anything I've ever felt, like it was pressing down on my chest. My heels clicked against the polished floor as I stepped inside, but every other sound seemed swallowed whole. The whispers, the glances, even my own heartbeat which I could have sworn was thunder in my ears. I didn't belong there, not really. But I came anyway. The second I crossed the threshold, I felt the stares. I didn't have to look up to know they were already talking. His mother's voice cut through the quiet like a blade, low but sharp. She shouldn't even be here. I froze. My hands were clenched into fists at my sides, fingernails digging into my palms. I hadn't even reached the third pew yet. She was sitting near the front, her black veil barely covering the cold fury in her eyes. Her jaw was tight, lips pressed together like a held-back scream. Her grief was real, I could see that. But so was her rage. I swallowed hard, forcing myself forward. Each step felt like I was dragging a 1,000-pound weight behind me. My legs wanted to turn and walk out, but something deeper, maybe guilt, maybe something worse, kept me going. Then Zara stood up, Elias's sister, fierce, loyal, and always the first to speak when no one else would. Her eyes locked onto mine like daggers. "You broke him," she said. Not a whisper, not a cry. A statement, solid, final. Gasp somewhere behind me. Someone dropped their program. I didn't know who. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to say something, anything, that I didn't mean to hurt him, that I still dreamt about him sometimes, that I never stopped wondering what would have happened if I'd stayed. But nothing came out. Because maybe she was right. I felt heat rush to my face, my throat tightening. My eyes burned, but I wouldn't let the tears fall. Not there. Not in front of all of them. I turned, ready to walk out. I should have known this would happen. I should have listened to my mother when she said, "Naomi, are you sure you want to go? It won't bring him back." But before I could take another step, I heard my name. Naomi. The voice was calm, gentle, steady in the chaos. The priest stood by the altar, eyes soft, a thin white envelope in his hand. "He asked for this to be read out loud," he said. I stared at it, at my name, written in that familiar, messy scrawl. Elias's handwriting. I hadn't seen it in almost 2 years, but I recognized it instantly. My knees went weak. I grabbed the edge of a pew just to stay standing. What could he possibly have written to me? I looked up. Every eye was on me now, some with pity, others with scorn, but mostly curiosity, confusion, like everyone was waiting to see what kind of twisted drama Elias had saved for the grave. My fingers trembled as I reached for the letter. The envelope was soft, worn, like it had been handled 100 times. Maybe it had. Maybe he'd written it long before he died, or maybe just days before. I had no idea. I wanted to run. I wanted to vanish. But part of me needed to know. Why me? Why this? I took a deep breath, turned to face them all, and opened the letter. I wasn't ready to open that letter, but I did. Not because I was brave, but because I think I owed him that much, after everything. As my fingers broke the seal, I couldn't stop thinking about how we ended, not with a bang, not even with a real goodbye, just silence. One day we were fighting, the next we were strangers. But before I tell you what was in the letter, I need to tell you about us. My name's Naomi Rivers. I met Elias when I was 21. I was the loud one, always laughing too hard, dreaming too big. He was different, quieter, like he carried storms in his chest but never let them show. And maybe that's what drew me to him, that quiet kind of intensity, like he saw me in a way no one else ever had. We were together for 4 years, 4 beautiful, heartbreaking, chaotic years. I won't lie to you and pretend it was perfect. It wasn't. Some days felt like we were orbiting 2 different planets, too far apart to touch. But on the good days, God, we were fire. We were soulmates, or at least I thought we were, until I wasn't enough anymore. The last year we were together, something shifted. Elias stopped opening up. He started disappearing, not physically, but emotionally. I'd ask him what was wrong, and he'd say, "Nothing," while staring right through me. He stopped holding my hand in public, stopped smiling at my stupid jokes, stopped saying, "I love you," like he meant it. And I started breaking, because I didn't know how to love someone who wouldn't let me in. I tried. I swear I tried everything. Therapy, long talks, space, no space, tears, silence, but nothing worked. One night, I packed a single bag, left the key on the kitchen table, and walked away. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. My mother told me I was doing the right thing. "You can't set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm," she said. I nodded, but every night afterward I still wondered if I'd left too soon, if I'd abandoned someone who just needed more patience. That was 2 years ago. I hadn't seen Elias since the night I walked out. Not even once. And then, last week, I got a call from Zara. Her voice was cracked and cold. She didn't say, "Hello," didn't say, "How are you?" Just, "Elias is gone. The funeral's Friday. Don't come." But I did. Not for them. For him. Because part of me still loved the boy I met at 21, still dreamed of the version of us that could have made it. And I thought, maybe showing up was the only way to let go. I wasn't expecting kindness. I definitely wasn't expecting forgiveness. But I also didn't expect to be handed a letter. His letter, in front of everyone who blamed me. As I held it, that same voice inside me whispered all the things I'd buried. What if he hated me? What if this letter is just one final blow? What if I was really the reason he didn't make it? The envelope felt heavy in my hands, not just in weight, but in meaning. I could feel Zara's eyes burning holes into my skin. I could hear his mother whispering something under her breath. The priest stepped back, leaving me alone with it. Alone with him, one last time, and I hadn't even started reading yet. The seal cracked with a soft tear, but it felt like thunder in that silent room. I unfolded the letter with shaky hands, my breath catching in my throat. I didn't start reading right away. I just stared at the first line. His handwriting, that same lazy slant, the same loops in his Y's that used to make me smile when he scribbled notes on the fridge or wrote little "I miss you" stickies on my mirror. But this wasn't that. This was his final message. And everyone was waiting to hear it. I looked up. Eyes were still on me. All of them, some filled with suspicion, some with outright hatred, and some, like the priest's, filled with something closer to sorrow. My throat tightened. My mouth was dry like I'd swallowed sand. I blinked hard, once, twice, willing myself not to cry. Not yet. I glanced to the right and caught Zara's stare. Her jaw was clenched, her arms crossed over her chest like she was physically holding herself back from storming the altar and yanking the letter from my hands. My stomach twisted. I couldn't stop the guilt from rushing in like a wave. Maybe I shouldn't have come. Maybe I don't deserve to read this. The words echoed in my mind like poison. I thought about the last conversation I had with Elias. We were sitting in his car outside my apartment. It was raining. Not pouring, just the soft kind, the kind that makes the world feel heavier. He wouldn't look at me, just stared out the windshield while I begged him to talk to me. I remember whispering, "Please, I need something, anything. I don't know how to keep fighting for us if you won't meet me halfway." And he'd said, still staring straight ahead, "Maybe I don't want to be fought for anymore." I don't think I ever recovered from that. I left that night, packed my things the next morning and never came back. So, yeah. Maybe Zara was right. Maybe I did break him. Or maybe he was already breaking, and I just wasn't enough to stop it. The thing is, when someone you love slips away slowly, you don't even realize it until they're gone. And when they are gone, in the most final way, all you're left with is a mountain of maybes. The priest took a step closer and gently touched my elbow. "Take your time," he said softly, as if he could feel my whole body trembling. I nodded, even though I wasn't sure what I was agreeing to. Read it now? Wait? But there was no later. Not really. The letter was in my hands. The room was watching, and I knew if I didn't open my mouth soon, I'd lose the nerve, and possibly the only chance to understand what Elias wanted me to know. So I did the only thing I could. I inhaled, deep, shaky breath in, and I began to read. "Naomi," I said out loud, voice cracking slightly. "If you're hearing this, I'm gone." A collective inhale rippled through the room. Even Zara shifted slightly in her seat. I kept going, my eyes scanning ahead just a few lines. And what I saw made my knees buckle. Because the next sentence, it wasn't what anyone, especially me, expected. My voice shook as I read the next line. Please don't let them turn you into a villain in my story." For a moment, I couldn't speak. I just stared at the paper like the words might rearrange themselves, but they didn't. They sat there, unmoving, undeniable. I looked up, instinct maybe, and met Zara's eyes. For the first time since I walked in, she looked confused, not angry, not hateful, just confused. And that did something to me. It gave me the tiniest flicker of courage, like maybe I could keep going, maybe I needed to. So I swallowed the lump in my throat and continued. "You left because you had to, because I wouldn't let you love me the way you wanted to. I know that now. I think I always did." My breath hitched. I paused and stared down at the letter, fingers gripping it tighter than necessary. The paper was starting to wrinkle under my hands, but I didn't care, because for the first time in 2 years, I was hearing him, really hearing him. And it wasn't blame, it wasn't anger, it was understanding. I let out a shaky laugh, one of those hollow, emotional laughs that kind of hurts on the way out. "I thought this letter would be a knife," I whispered, "but it feels more like a bandage." I don't know why I said it out loud. Maybe because part of me had forgotten the room was even there. Maybe because the moment felt too big to hold in silence. The priest stepped back slightly, giving me space, giving Elias space, really. I looked down and kept reading. "There are things I never said to you. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know how. You always asked me to open up and I shut you out. That wasn't your fault. That was me, afraid of being seen. You saw me anyway, and it scared the hell out of me." I could hear someone crying softly behind me. Maybe one of his cousins, maybe a stranger. But not Zara, not yet. "You were the only one who ever made me feel safe, Naomi, and I'm sorry that I couldn't return the favor." That line shattered something in me. I pressed the letter to my chest for a moment just to catch my breath. I didn't want to fall apart in front of them. I didn't want to cry in front of a room full of people who weren't ready to see me as anything but a mistake. But Elias, he saw me, even in death. I glanced at his mother. Still stone-faced, but her shoulders had dropped slightly. Her hands weren't clenched anymore. I took a step closer to the front, my voice a little stronger now. "I don't want you to carry my darkness like it's yours. That's why I left this letter. So you'd know the truth. You didn't break me, Naomi. I was already broken." And that was it. That was the line that changed the room. Zara blinked hard and looked away. The priest exhaled slowly. Even the silence changed, less brittle, more stunned. I folded the letter, my hands finally steady. The choice to come here felt right now. Not easy, not painless, but right. And as I turned to face the people who once thought I didn't deserve to be there, I realized something. Elias hadn't written the letter for closure. He wrote it for forgiveness. Mine. I stood there for a few seconds after I finished reading, unsure of what to do next. The paper in my hands felt warm now, like it had absorbed everything. The tremble in my voice, the heat of the moment, the silence that followed. No one spoke, not even the priest. It was the kind of quiet that didn't feel empty. It felt full, like the room had collectively exhaled, a breath it didn't know it was holding. I looked around slowly. Faces that once held judgment now looked uncertain. Some were tear-streaked. Others avoided my gaze completely, ashamed maybe that they'd been so quick to believe the worst of me. But it was Zara I looked for. And when I found her, she wasn't sitting anymore. She was standing at the edge of her pew, eyes red but dry. Her arms had dropped to her sides, fingers twitching like she wanted to say something but didn't know how. We stared at each other for a long time, and then she whispered, just loud enough for the front rows to hear, "Why didn't he say any of that to us?" It broke something in her voice, and in me. I didn't know how to answer. I wasn't sure there was an answer. I'd asked myself that same question 100 times while we were together. Why don't you just talk to me? But Elias wasn't the kind of person who let his pain spill. He tucked it away like broken glass in a drawer. Out of sight, but always cutting him from the inside. "I think he wanted to protect you," I said quietly. "All of you." Zara didn't respond. She just nodded once, like that was the only answer she needed. His mother, though. I don't know if she forgave me in that moment. Maybe she never will. But I caught her wiping her cheek with the edge of her black sleeve. Her eyes never met mine, but the hard line in her jaw softened. And that was enough. The priest cleared his throat gently and stepped forward again. "We were going to end the service with a prayer," he said, his voice low and reverent, but I think Elias's words were more than enough. A few people nodded. Others bowed their heads. I just stood there, the letter still pressed against my heart, and let the moment sink into my skin. I thought walking into that church was the hardest thing I'd ever do. I thought hearing their anger would destroy me, and maybe it almost did. But standing there with Elias's words wrapped around me like armor, I didn't feel broken. I felt whole. For the first time in years, I wasn't weighed down by the what-ifs or the maybe I should haves. I had the truth. I had his truth, and it changed everything. As people began to leave, some offered gentle nods in my direction. No one spoke, but their silence was different now. Not cold, not condemning, just quiet, respectful. I walked outside into the crisp afternoon air, the sky still gray but softening around the edges. A breeze swept through, catching my hair and the edge of the letter as I folded it back into the envelope. Zara followed me out. She didn't say anything at first, just stood beside me, arms crossed against the chill. Then finally, almost like it hurt to push the words out, and she said, I hated you. I didn't flinch. I know. I don't anymore, she whispered. I think I just didn't know the whole story. Neither of us smiled, but we understood each other now, and that was enough. I didn't go to the burial. Not because I didn't care, but because I'd said goodbye the way Elias needed me to, in front of everyone, through his own words. And honestly, I think that was his final gift to me. I stood outside the church for a long time after everyone had left. The street was quiet, the sky a soft, smoky gray like it couldn't decide whether to rain or clear up. I liked the in-between. It matched how I felt. Not broken, not healed, just in between. I sat on the edge of the stone steps and pulled the letter back out, smoothing the creases with my fingers. I didn't reread it right away. I just held it, let it sit in my hands like a heartbeat, warm and alive in a way he no longer was. I remember thinking, he couldn't say it when he was alive, but he still wanted me to know. It made me wonder how many of us carry things we never say. How many people walk away before they realize someone loved them all along? How many apologies are buried before they ever make it to the surface? Elias had been lost long before I left, but I carried that loss like it was mine to fix. I blamed myself for his silence, for his sadness, for his unraveling, and I let that guilt weigh me down for 2 whole years. But now I could finally breathe, not because he absolved me, but because he saw me, even in the end. And that was more powerful than any forgiveness I thought I needed. A few days after the funeral, Zara called. Not texted, not emailed, called. I almost didn't answer, but I did. She didn't say much, just told me she'd been thinking a lot about the letter, and that she'd like to read it again if I was okay with that. I mailed her a copy. We haven't become close, and I'm not sure we ever will. But the walls are down now. And sometimes that's all healing really needs, space where there used to be silence. I also started writing again. It was something I gave up when Elias and I split. I think a part of me didn't feel worthy of telling stories anymore, like the best chapter of my life had closed and everything after would just be blank pages. But I realized something. Pain doesn't end a story. It just changes the tone. And Elias? He wasn't the final chapter in my book. He was the one that made the pages deeper, more complicated, more human. He was the lesson I didn't know I needed. So here's what I want to leave you with, especially if you're still carrying something heavy or loving someone who doesn't know how to love you back. Let them go gently, but hold on to the truth, because love doesn't always look like forever. Sometimes it looks like letting go, like walking into a room full of people who hate you and reading a letter that brings silence instead of screams. Sometimes love is the thing we leave behind, and sometimes it's what sets us free.